Let's go.
Hi, I'm Carol Gold,
I'm Steve Clark.
and we are together above the fray podcast.com. Steve and I used to do a podcast, and we've no longer, we've decided to no longer do that, but we still write daily to above the fray podcast.com, and decided recently that we'd like to give you sort of snippets on YouTube of what we used to do on the full podcast. So we're going to try to talk about things that we think are important to you because they're important to us, and we are just like you. And what we're going to start with today is this concept of idol worship, but not in the biblical sense, in the current day sense. And the story I want to give you is that a friend of mine called me this week, and she said, "Oh, did you hear that Jennifer Aniston and Justin Theroux are splitting up after only a year's marriage because of something he allegedly did or said, whatever?" And I thought to myself, why do we, number one, care? But number two, because what she said to me was, gee, I hope that's not true for her sake. You know, she's been through so much and she really deserves a break. It would be really sad. And I thought to myself, number one, as I said, why do we care? But number two, why do we attribute qualities to people? How do we know what Jennifer Aniston deserves? How do we know what kind of person she is? How do we know what the circumstances are surrounding her relationships? And it got me thinking about how we create false idols out of people, how we hero worship, whether it's sports figures or it's entertainers or politicians. I mean, it's really hard in this political season not to go there, right, with egos and Donald Trump and etc. But that's not really what we want to talk to you about, because that's sort of the obvious and the easy road to take. It's deeper than that. It's what is it that we are lacking within ourselves or think we are that we need to project outward and fixate on famous people, politicians, movie stars, etc. So, Steve, what are your thoughts around this?
Yeah, I think the thing that I think has happened over the last, especially the last decade, has been kind of this movement towards this entertainment culture that kind of is everywhere, that exists everywhere. And if you look at just kind of some of the late night shows, they actually have a lot of fun with it. They actually have, Jimmy Fallon has a skit, as well as, I forget the other guy's name, on late night show TV, where they actually go out. And
Conan O'Brien?
Not Conan O'Brien. He has something similar where and Bill O'Reilly does it as well, where they go out and they actually ask people general basic questions like, you know, who's the president? When was World War II? When did it end? Who did we fight against? And then they'll throw in a random question like, you know, what is Kim Kardashian's baby's name, or who is she married to? And invariably what happens is they never get the basic history questions or the basic facts of their country, right, or kind of the state of affairs that we live in, but they inevitably always get the correct answer for the celebrity news. And I think it's a telling sign, because we're living in a society, we're living in a culture that is formed from the past by rules and regulations, and essentially the Constitution that formed the country, and the people are unaware of that basic structure of how we live. So I think, because we've lost that connection, we've lost that semblance of what the Constitution dictated and gave us certain rights in the country, we've lost that, and people have become more focused on entertainment.
So I agree with you, but I think it's a deliberate distraction. I think it's done deliberately. In other words, it takes two. It takes someone promoting the distraction, and then it takes someone willing to engage in the distraction, right? So I think what's happened is those people who are in positions of power, be it the media or be it politicians or anyone who wants to manipulate a large group of people, they create these distractions. I remember decades ago, I was in Russia, and I was so taken by the fact that in the stores there was so little food on the shelves, and it was so expensive, and the living conditions, even in Moscow, Leningrad, were just so, to us, would have been unacceptable, okay? But every single person could go to the Bolshoi for 25 cents. Why? They were using the culture to distract the people from the realities of their condition. And I think the same thing happens here, but I always like to bring it back home. I don't necessarily like to blame who's trying to do the manipulation. I think we always need to own the responsibility of why do we participate in the response, in the manipulation? Why do we become willing victims, so to speak? Why do we so quickly give up personal power to someone or something outside of ourselves? And I think it's an inherent disconnect from what I call source, you might call God, whatever you call it. There's a force, there's a power in the universe that sustains everything that goes on. We breathe because something is sustaining what we call the breath of life. Something is causing that to happen and providing all the sustenance and all of the biochemistry and everything that we need to keep going. So to me, if you connect there instead of connecting outside yourself, if you connect with the source of all that is, then you're much less likely to feel that you need any external connection. And when you unplug from the culture, in essence, when you unplug from what you're told to accept, remember, from the time we're born, we're told, no, you can't do this, you can't do that. There's only certain things you can do that are socially acceptable. When you unplug from that, assuming you do no harm to anyone else, you don't need to project onto a Princess Diana or a Kim Kardashian or a President Obama, whoever it is. You don't need to do that any longer. And I think that's where not only are we hurting the most, but that's where the remedy is for so much of what we're being challenged with now.
Yeah, I tend to look at it a little bit differently. I think it's important that people have a framework on how to live or how to look at the world, a basic framework. And the framework, especially as it relates to the U.S., is the Constitution. The Constitution laid out in, I think, especially if you look at, say, the Bill of Rights, where basically they're all rights that are given to man that limits the power of government over their lives. And I think what's happened is that people no longer really understand or really know what those rights mean, and so they become disconnected, and they tend to focus on something else. I have kids here in the local school system, and although they do a good job of teaching, the framework isn't really taught anymore. Mm-hmm. And I think if you don't understand the framework of what it means to live here, then you become disconnected. Again, just the simple ones, the right to bear arms, the right to free speech, the right to free assembly, and why they're so important. And if people forget why those things are so important, it's very easy to manipulate the culture that we live in.
Well, that document, the Constitution that you're talking about, and those rights that you say are given to man, in the document are given to man by God.
Exactly.
They're divine rights. They're your right by birth. So simply the fact that you were born gives you those rights.
Let me just interrupt.
Yeah,
and in the document it says these rights are not given to us by us. It's not we who are writing that given to you. They are given to all of us by God.
Right. So I agree with you, and I think that what you say only, it lines up really well with what I'm saying, which is the founders, because we talk about that document being divinely inspired, right? So the founders connected to that source that I talk about, right. and they said, we understand it's not us. We're communicating to you something that we understand that is vitally important, and we're telling you where what we are giving you originates from. And it doesn't originate from us, man. It originates from divinity, from a divine source that gives us all these rights. And so I think as Americans, we are uniquely situated in the history of humankind in that, number one, we have an acknowledgement. We have a cultural and a national acknowledgement of a divine source. And we have a document that provides the framework you're talking about. But I think the harm that we do to ourselves is that we've disconnected that document from its divine source. And therefore, that document is constantly challenged and berated and dismissed and called outdated because it's been disconnected from its source. And that's what we then do. Well, I don't know what came first, the chicken or the egg. I don't know if we disconnected from source and so now it becomes really easy to disconnect the document, or whether in disconnecting the document, we've disconnected ourselves. It's probably an argument both ways, but regardless, I think it's an issue of disconnect. And it's like a lamp. You pull the plug out of the wall, it doesn't light up anymore. It's still there, but it has ceased to function in the manner in which it was intended to. And in order to make it light again, you've got to put the plug back in the wall. You've got to reconnect.
Yeah, I'd also say part of the appeal, especially on the Democrat side or somebody from Bernie Sanders, it's kind of a transference of instead of individual rights and responsibilities, looking for the government as a solution, that taking money or taking resources from other people, then giving it back to the government, which will then give it back to other people again, is kind of the ultimate disconnect of power. Because basically what we're saying is to one group of people, we don't think you're capable or responsible enough of managing on your own, so we're actually going to take it from other people and give it to somebody else. So I think that's even in the candidates, you can see that disconnect manifesting itself.
I think what you call a disconnect to the candidates with government and Bernie Sanders,
Right.
that example, I would call a transference of power.
Right.
So the socialists, which is what Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton are, they transfer power from God to the state, right?
Yeah.
And in doing that, that becomes your new idol. That's your golden calf, because now the state's going to give you everything that is yours by divine right. And when you give away that power to the state, it then doesn't have parameters on how much power it needs to sustain itself. It wants more. The more you give it, the more it wants. That's what happens with government. There's never, my friend used to have an expression, more is never enough.
Right.
That's the motto of government. More is never enough. More power, more money, more centralized control. So Steve and I believe that it's up to each one of us individually, that we both believe that there's no one politician, there's no one person who's going to do this for us. And that this is getting our country back on track, where we have fundamental principles, even if they are evolving over time, nonetheless, fundamental principles that are life enhancing. And by the way, just so I don't forget, because I thought of it a minute ago, we talked about transference of power. Along with that transference of power, the natural outgrowth of that is transfer of wealth.
Right.
So we've given, when you take the power away from God and give it to government, what government does, it turns around and it takes away your power and gives it to somebody else or whoever it wants to give it to. And in the case of socialism, it tends to give a meager amount to the people and keep the rest of it for those who are in power at the highest levels. So socialism isn't truly equality of any sort. Every historical society that has chosen socialism eventually winds up with an elitist population at the top and the people, the masses, doing most poorly. So, having said a whole lot in how many? 12, 13 minutes. Steve and I hope that you enjoy this. We hope to bring you more. Let us suggest or even ask you, either leave comments at the bottom of the video or contact us through the website at contact@carolgold.com. You can do that right off of abovethefraypodcast.com. Let us know your thoughts on this. Let us know your thoughts on our blogs. And hopefully you'll stimulate in us other subjects that are important to you. And what's important to you is important to us. So thanks for listening. I'm
Thank you.
Carol Gold.
I'm Steve Clark.
Have a great day.